In this week's Tzedaka of VaYakhel-Pikudei, we have the re-mentioning of all that was contributed to the Mishkan for the fashioning of the Mishkan itself and all the kelim that were to be found therein, and regarding the Big Day Kahuna and the Big Day Srad as well. We have the pasuk, the all-telling pasuk that tells us, Vahanesiim, and the heads of the respective tribes, the Shiftei Kar, Heviu, what did they bring? Eis Avnei HaShoam ve'Eis Avnei HaMiluim. They brought the onyx stones that were to be found upon the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol, and the stones that were to be found upon the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate that the Kohen Gadol wore. Rashi points out, Vahanesiim Heviu, that whereas by the Chanukas Habayis, the Nesiim were very quick to be amongst the literal first individuals to consecrate the Mishkan itself, when it came to contributing towards the construct of the Mishkan, they were the last. And therefore, says Rashi, Vahanesiim Heviu, the word Vahanesiim referring to the heads of the Shiftei Kar, the chieftains, it's missing a yud. And it's missing a yud because even though they gave very, very precious stones to the Mishkan itself, but they did so at the very conclusion of the contributions, at the very end. And they said, says Rashi, they said, let everybody bring whatever they'll contribute. And then not only we will match it, we'll do more than that. We will fulfill all that is needed, the ultimate amount required by the Mishkan, we'll make up the deficit. But says Rashi, because they did this in the Fishinis Atzlum B'tchila, because they were somewhat lazy in not paving the way and serving as representatives for how to contribute and being the first ones to give to the Mishkan, because of that, Nexera Os Mishmam, there was a letter missing from their name. What was so terrible? They were somewhat lazy, but they contributed such a valuable thing to the Mishkan. Those stones, those precious gems were worth endless sums of money. The HaKadosh explains that not simply were they lazy, but because they gave last, therefore they're missing a letter from their name. But the Rashbam has a very short comment on this pasuk, and it's so very telling, beyond, I believe, what Rashi and the HaKadosh have to offer. It says Rashi, Vahanesiim Eviu es Avnei HaShoam. Why did they bring the Avnei HaShoam and the Avnei Miluim? Sheharei Shemo Shivtehem Kesuvim Aleim, because the names of their tribes were written upon them. In other words, perhaps they knew ahead of time that their names were to be inscribed upon the stones to be found upon the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol, and they said, our names are going to be on that? Well, that's what we want to give to the Mishkan. We want to give something to the Mishkan that has our names upon it. For after all of Klal Yisrael contributed to the boxes, to the Adonim that housed the Krushim, the boards and the walls of the Mishkan, but there are no names there. And there are names on the Krushim, and there are no names on the Yohel or the Miksei. There are no names upon the Masach. There's no name upon the Paroches. There's no names upon the Shulchan or the Menorah Zahav. There's no names upon the Mizbeach Ha'olah, the Choshes, the Mizbeach HaZahav. No names. But on the Avnei Shoam and on the Avnei Miluim, there are names. Well, that's what we want to give. We want to give something that will bear for posterity our names upon them. And the Torah is in fact telling us that, as the Rambam in fact cites in Yad HaChazaka, the greatest form of tzedakah for another individual is to give in a fashion that you don't know whom you're giving to and the recipient doesn't know whom he's receiving from. And when you're not giving to an individual, but you're giving to the house that will hold the residence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'shachanti b'socham, you're giving away perhaps not because it's going to have your names. If it ends up having your names because they're required, wonderful. But you don't give that which has your names inscribed upon them, so that your names can stand out. There was a fellow who was nifter who passed away a few years ago, and he was purportedly the greatest Baal Tzedaka of our times, excepting one particular institution in Eretz Yisrael that has his name upon the wall. All of the tzedakos throughout the world, in Israel and in Europe and the United States of America, that received endless millions, multi-millions of dollars from him and his family, none of them bear his name whatsoever, because he didn't want it. Reminds me of a most unusual balabas whom I had davening in my shul, and he was an OBGYN. To this very day, I'm still close with him. He was such a special person, and he was ultimately a great sanua, both in the delivery room and in his general demeanor. And I'll never forget that whereas no one davening in the shul would possibly know which women were his patients, but often I would see, because he would sit in the first row off the bima, and I would see him in the middle of davening smile as a young child passed in front of him. And I knew that the reason he was smiling was because he knew that he delivered that child. No names, no inscription, but he knew that he had a chelek, such an important portion in the life, literally in the life, and the growth of that child passing before him. The name of that greatest tzedakah of our times, well, of course, I'm not going to share it with you because it would be impudent of me. But without a question, in my mind, when that person was ultimately nifter, oh, what a smile he must have had upon his face. Nowhere was to be found the inscription of his name. Have a wonderful Shabbos.